Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. I recently completed the Japanese horror movie Iceberg with over 200 entries and a whopping 3 hours of content. The video's been doing great by the way, so thanks everyone for watching. Having done my fair share of huge icebergs, I know that there are a lot of viewers who really enjoy the more unsettling entries, let's say. And the J-horror movie Iceberg did not disappoint, having some of the most revolting acts ever put to film. That being said, these movies are spread throughout the massive iceberg. So I thought it would be fun to take the movies I found to be most disturbing and put them all together so you can see the absolute most insane entries without having to watch through all 3 hours of the iceberg. I could easily make a second video like this, and it was hard to pick just 10, but these are the movies that made me squirm with uncomfort and left me shocked at what I just witnessed. So without any further ado, these are the 10 most disturbing Japanese horror films I've ever seen. GOZU. GOZU is one of the weirdest movies on this tier. It's got some horror elements to it, but mostly it just feels like an absurdist dark comedy. The opening of the movie is a Yakuza gangster, Ozaki, deciding that a cute little puppy is a killer attack dog and smashing the dog into the pavement over and over. That's literally the opening scene. So the gang leader decides that he is a security risk, which I'd have to agree with if I'm being honest, and he orders Minami, who is actually Ozaki's brother, to kill him and ditch his body in a dump. He's reluctant to do so until he kills him by accident, at which point he decides to follow through with it and dump the body. Problem is, he stops to use a payphone in a small town and the body goes missing. From here, the bulk of the movie is Minami searching for his brother's body and encountering really weird people. I'm gonna go ahead and just get into some of the spoilers here, but there are some things in this movie that I just can't not mention. One of the weirdest and disturbing characters in this movie is an old innkeeper who won't stop talking about her breasts and producing milk from them. The first scene where we see this is when she offers to wash Minami in the bath of her inn, and he gets all embarrassed and declines, and then she randomly is like, "Hey, I got big boobs, right? You know I can squirt milk out of these bad boys." I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but you get the point. Then she starts squeezing her boob, which is thankfully covered by a blouse, and a wet spot appears, and we see milk running down her leg. I mean, what are we doing here? Also, and this is major spoilers here, the gang boss has a weird kink where he apparently can't get off without a soup ladle in his ass, which is showcased way too often in my humble opinion. Also, more spoilers here, he ends up dying by falling backwards onto the ladle, which basically impales him. And then your boy Minami touches the ladle with exposed wire, which electrocutes him. Okay, one more thing here on GOZU, and I promise we'll move on. Minami ends up finding his brother, who is now a woman, and she keeps trying to have sex with him, which by the way, at the end of the movie, they do so. It's really disturbing and weird, but that's not all folks. While they're banging it out, all of a sudden Minami's pee-pee gets clamped down on, and before you know it, male Ozaki comes crawling out of female Ozaki's vagina. I mean, what the fuck? None of this is exaggerated, by the way. If anything, I've toned it down from the actual movie. It's truly one of the most bizarre films I've ever heard of, and I didn't even cover the half of it here. But man, it's weird and wild stuff. Midori. Midori, or Shojo Tsubaki, is a 1992 animated film based on a manga, and I guess Shojo Tsubaki translates to the Camellia Girl. It's worth noting that this film is basically universally banned, and it was practically seen by no one for a long time, but hey, thank God for the internet, right? So Midori is a young girl whose parents die. The movie essentially starts with her finding her mother's corpse eaten by rats. It's a really brutal looking image, so it's just off to the races after this. Now she has no place to go and ends up staying with the circus troupe. From this point on, the movie mostly follows Midori being physically abused by the circus performers. The fact that she's an underage girl makes a lot of this particularly messed up, and it's not a shock as to why this was banned so heavily. Eventually a magician arrives at the circus, and it turns out that the dude has actual magical powers. He ends up falling in love with Midori and marrying her. There's a lot of creepy stuff here because they're like smooching and making out and stuff, and keep in mind that Midori is 12 years old, so yuck. Besides the gross pedo stuff, there is a ton of gore in this film. I already mentioned the rats, but there's just a lot of detailed body horror kind of stuff and graphic imagery. One scene just straight up shows the magician killing a ton of people in grotesque ways by showing their bodies deformed and exploding. Probably the most disturbing scene is when Midori finds some adorable loving puppies, and one of the circus performers picks one up and smashes it into the ground and then stomps on it so that its guts and brains explode out of its body. Later that night they eat stew, and she reveals that it's dog meat from the puppy she killed. Of course, this is after everyone eats it, including Midori. It's a very strange and violent movie. Sometimes it feels like someone just tried to come up with the worst possible things they could and stuck them into a 45-minute film. I can't even really go into all the story details because it gets to the point where it's sort of hard to follow, and it's one of those movies where people have different interpretations of it and even theories as to what the film means, especially regarding its confusing ending. A lot of the reviews I've seen tend to criticize it for just being needless exploitation and that there isn't much of a plot or story to follow, while others defend it as a work of art. art, but I don't know. You can be the judge, I guess. Devil's Experiment. Guinea Pig, Devil's Experiment is a really disturbing movie. I'm not even sure if you can call it a movie, honestly. It's more like a 43-minute showcase of torture and some amazing special effects. The entire thing is literally just 3 guys torturing a woman in various ways. Part of why the whole thing is immediately disturbing is the fact that it feels like a home video. The first title card we see just says hit, which is just the men striking the woman repeatedly, followed by kick, which is exactly as it sounds. These 2 segments are not too bad because you can kind of tell they aren't really hitting her full force. But from there, it's a significant step up as we see the next sequence titled Claw. Honestly, this one's the most hard to watch for me besides the final method. The men take pliers and grab the knuckle part of her hand and twist it, followed by doing the same to her arm, and man, that hand thing makes me cringe. Next is Unconscious, which shows the men spinning the girl in a chair 200 times and forcing alcohol down her throat, which she throws up, of course. Sound features the girl being forced to listen to white noise for 5 hours, at which point she starts to scream like it's nobody's business. I mean, kudos to the actress because it's actually really unsettling. In another gross one labeled Skin, we watch as the girl's fingernails pulled off. And in Burn, the girl is burned with hot oil that's followed by worms where they begin dumping maggots all over her wounds. If that didn't make you want to puke, they start dumping organs and entrails on her, and for whatever reason, they also cut open her hand and then smash it with a hammer. Last but certainly not least is the 10th and final segment, Needle. I'm not super squeamish, and most of the things so far skeeved me out a bit, but man, this last one, I was basically watching through my fingers because the men now poke a needle through her temple and eventually all the way through her eyeball. The effects here are incredible and look very realistic. This movie, along with much of the other Guinea Pig series, kind of strikes a bit of a debate as to what is considered a real film and what level of depravity should be accepted as art. It's a tough one for me because on one hand, I didn't enjoy watching this and I wouldn't recommend anyone really does. It doesn't feel like a movie, but more of an experiment in video. That being said, I can't help but respect the special effects here because they're insanely good, especially for a low budget project like this. While we're here, we might as well do Guinea Pig 2, Flowers of Flesh and Blood. This is very similar to the first Guinea Pig film, Devil's Experiment, in that it's arguable as to whether you can really consider it a film because it's literally just a man torturing a woman for 40 minutes. And of course, it's conveyed as if it's a real snuff film. In a lot of ways, this one is even more disturbing than the Devil's Experiment because he doesn't just torture her, he dismembers her limb by limb. I'll get into the details here, but just a fair warning, this is really graphic. So the film starts basically the same as Guinea Pig 1. We have a scrolling text explaining that a gore manga artist was sent the film in the mail and that it contains footage of an actual murder. This one differs from the last because we actually watch the victim being stalked, eventually being chased down and subdued. After a title sequence, the victim wakes up in basically a torture dungeon. She's tied up and gagged, unable to get free before she sees her captor, a dude wearing a samurai helmet for whatever reason. He pulls a chicken out of a little makeshift coop and declares the woman and the chicken to have the same fate and then cuts the chicken's head off, which falls onto her body. He then injects her with some kind of serum that seems to make her not feel pain or mellows her out or whatever. After a little spiel about how he finds pain and blood beautiful, he pulls out a knife and begins cutting her hand off. The effects are, once again, really good here. You mix that with some gruesome sound effects and the lack of music, and it really is uncomfortable to watch. So after cutting off both her hands, he moves on to her arms, and this is where I think the practical effects are the most impressive because they really look like her arms, and after he finishes cutting them off, we get a shot of her armless, and damn, it looks legit. Of course, from here, he moves on to her legs, cutting them off above the knee, and we see him admiring her bloody leg like it's a magnificent piece of art or something. Next, he goes for her stomach. So I know people react differently to certain kinds of gore. So for instance, the sawing through the flesh and bone is really cringy to me, but now he begins to pull the guts out of her stomach, and it's disgusting. If you're squeamish about this kind of stuff, just skip it. Just skip this whole thing because yuck. Well, now there's only one thing left. Her head. So the samurai dude picks up an axe and cuts her head off. Honestly, this one is the most unrealistic sequence because it like flies off and hits the wall in a really campy fashion. But don't worry, it gets disturbing again when he takes the head and starts to scoop out her eyes with a spoon. And if you remember in the Devil's Experiment, the effects on the eyeball being stabbed by the needle, they were incredible. And the eyeball effects here are maybe even better. It makes my eyeball hurt just talking about it. So he now adds her body to his collection, which consists of all kinds of body parts, skin, torsos, very typical Ed Gein style stuff. The movie ends by showing another girl walking, implying his next victim. So that's Guinea Pig 2, Flowers of Flesh and Blood. It's straight up torture porn. There's not really a story. And like I said, for Devil's Experiment, it's really, if anything, a showcase of some amazing blood and gore effects, which is probably the best thing I can say about it. I should probably also add that this movie is notorious because apparently Charlie Sheen somehow got a copy of it on VHS and thought that it was a real snuff film, so he called the FBI. Just thought you should know that. Red Room. Red Room is a particularly disturbing movie about a game show. The concept of the show is that the 4 contestants draw cards. Whoever draws the king card gets to pick 2 other contestants to enter the red room. Within the red room, the person who got the king card can demand any number of violent acts be done to and by the contestants inside. This starts off mild and slowly increases into really disturbing torture. The last contestant to be alive wins 10 million yen. So that's literally the whole movie. Obviously, there's maybe some intrigue as to who will win, but overall it just feels like a creative way to make a torture flick. So disturb alert here, but there's a few horrifying scenes in the movie, including a man urinating in a woman's mouth, a hairdryer being forced down a man's throat and turned to high heat, and the most notorious is when a man puts several objects into a girl's no-no place, including a light bulb which then breaks. Well, that might be the most messed up thing I've heard on the iceberg so far. So I don't know about this one. It's pretty hard to find anywhere, which maybe is a good thing, because I'm not sure there's much worth seeing here. Splatter, Naked Blood. Splatter is another one of those movies that's always floating around the disturbing movie sphere, and for good reason, because, well, it's disturbing. The basic concept is that a young chemist, AG, creates a drug that makes pain feel like pleasure. So it plays out like this. AG's mother is actually a medical researcher who is testing out a new form of birth control on 3 volunteers. So Edgy, a real Dennis the Menace type, injects his own formula that he calls My Son into the IV bags. Edgy, sabotaging your mother's experiment with your own potentially harmful drug that hasn't been tested at all, you little rascal. So the drug takes 24 hours to go into effect, and Edgy begins stalking and secretly filming the 3 girls to see how it all shakes out. If you don't want any spoilers for this one, go ahead and skip ahead, but I have to go into the details here because this is one of the most disturbing movies on the iceberg, so fair warning. One of the girls, Rika, spots Edgy filming her and calls him out, and I guess gives him a pass on the whole stalking thing because she actually hangs out with the dork after the awkward exchange. Meanwhile, the other 2 girls are up to their own shenanigans. Hungry Butt, that's her actual name, don't wear it out, cuts her finger while cooking a meal and seems almost euphoric as she sucks the blood from the wound. Well, I guess that aroused her appetite because what she does next is some messed up combination of cringy, disturbing, and funny. While frying some food, she dips her hand in the batter and fries her hand. Then she begins eating her hand, which yes is really disturbing, but on the other hand, it's not really that gory. She just bites off her fingers, which look like fried chicken, and it's almost funny. It kind of looks like something you'd see on Tim and Eric, but the part that really makes it cringy is the sound effects. The crunchy sounds you hear are uncomfortable as hell. Just don't watch this with headphones. Meanwhile, the 3rd girl, Vanity, has been making little cuts all over her body, and as she sits in front of the mirror covered in blood, she just starts stabbing her arm until Rika shows up and just slaps the shit out of her as if to say, what the hell are you doing? So she says they'll go to the hospital tomorrow to figure out what's up with them. What, you can't go now? Anyway, back to Hungry Butt, and it gets bad. It gets so bad. Edgy is filming her through her window, and brace yourselves guys, this gets really gross. Well, she's eating more of herself, and by herself I mean with a knife and fork she cuts off her own and eats it. I really don't think I can eat a roast beef from Arby's anytime soon after this one. She also eats her nipple and suddenly stabs herself in the eye with the fork, pulls it out, and eats it. I've covered some nasty stuff on this iceberg, but my god, this is one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen, and much like with the guinea pig series, I have to give props because her yanking her own eye out is one of the best gore effects I've seen throughout all of these movies. That being said, I don't ever want to watch it again. So Rika ends up discovering Hungry Butt's body, who ended up dying, obviously, along with Vanity, who stabbed herself in the head. So Edgy's all pissed off that his experiment didn't go as he'd hoped and fesses up to his mom about the whole thing. He gets all emotional and starts trying to kiss her. Why do they always have to throw incest into these movies? Like, it's not messed up enough watching a girl eat her own snatch. I gotta watch a dude suck face with his mom. Anyway, she's not into it, thankfully, and throws him off. Rika shows up to be examined and then slices open the stomach of Edgy's mom and just leaves her there to suffer with her innards all hanging out. Then Rika ends up with Edgy and they bang before Edgy injects the rest of the formula into Rika and orders her to kill him. So she slices and stabs the hell out of him. Meanwhile, Edgy's mom is in the afterlife, still lying with her stomach cut open, and her dead husband is there, who crawls inside her stomach and pulls it shut behind him, which is one of the most bizarre things I've seen. And it kind of reminds me of GOZU in the last tier when that guy's crawling out of that girl. Now we fast forward to a few years into the future where Rika and her son, Edgy Jr., initiate their new plan of spreading the new sun formula across the world. Wow, I did not expect the ending to get so weird. Like, yeah, I thought, okay, gore fest, these girls do horrible things to themselves, but the ending took me by surprise. So check this one out. Just make sure you've already eaten. Grotesque. Okay guys, torture is a staple at this point in the Japanese horror movie Iceberg, and this one's a doozy. Just a heads up, it's probably the most disturbing on the iceberg so far. Grotesque is about a psychopath who kidnaps a young couple and tortures them. Yep, so yeah, that's the movie. Moving on. Oh, what? You want to hear all the gruesome details? Fine. After knocking them out with a hammer, the psycho, I'm just going to call him Psycho, brings the couple back to his torture dungeon where they are strapped upright and facing each other from opposite sides of the room. The psycho asks the young man if he'd like to go first before cutting his tongue with a metal device and then stabbing him in the stomach with it. This psycho seems really interested in the couple's relationship, asking them how many times they've had sex and would they die for each other. He then rapes both of his victims and makes the other watch. I mean, clearly the guy's a real romantic. Eventually he moves them onto operating like tables and begins mutilating them in several different ways. This includes cutting off the male's fingers and making a necklace of them, which he then places around the girl's neck, cutting off the girl's nipples, which I don't think we've seen since Tier 2 with Ichi the Killer. He also cuts off the girl's arms, so call back to Flowers of Flesh and Blood. I think the worst part is when he tells the boy that if he can't withstand the torture, he'll begin to torture the girl instead. After this, he drives a nail through the guy's sack, which it shows in detail, and then cuts off his wang, which is also shown. It's like someone took all the most messed up things we've covered in the iceberg so far and just smashed them all into one torture film. After he does this, he treats the wounds so that they'll survive longer, which sort of suggests, along with the equipment he has, that he's a surgeon or doctor. So big spoilers after this point, not that it matters. It's not like when Han Solo died. People aren't going to be like, damn man, why'd you spoil the ball torture? I would have liked to be surprised. Anyway, the couple eventually wake up in what looks like a more traditional clean hospital room. The psycho surgeon comes in and tells them that he's been satisfied and tells them that once they've healed up, he'll let them free, turn himself in, and give them his accrued fortune, which is a pretty large amount. There's a touching moment alone in the hospital room where the couple promises to support each other after they get out. I mean, it kind of makes you think, maybe there's a light at the end of the tunnel here. Nope. The couple once again wake up in the torture chamber. I mean, that's so messed up. The guy just basically pranked them. It's like the most effed up Rickroll of all time. I mean, what an absolute dick. So the psychosurgeon reveals one last test of love between the couple. He cuts out the young man's intestines, attaches them to a hook, and promises that if he can make it across to the girl and cut her ropes with a pair of scissors, he'll finally let them free. Unfortunately, as he makes his way across, stretching his intestines further and further out of his body, he discovers that under the rope is metal wire and finally passes out. At this point, the girl just doesn't give a damn and spits on the surgeon, calling his mom a fat whore, which is unexpected and hilarious. In a fit of rage, he disembowels her with a chainsaw and cuts her head off, which up to this point the movie's been portrayed in a fairly realistic way. I mean, it's not like the devil's experiment or anything, but not goofy. That is until this moment, because the girl's head, still being conscious as it flies through the air, nosedives to the guy and bites his neck. It looks like something from Evil Dead 2. I mean, it's nutty. At the same time, the dude passed out on the ground regains consciousness and uses the scissors to slash the dude's foot. Unfortunately, it turns out that the psycho survives and the whole movie ends as he goes for another victim. As I said, this has got to be the most disturbing film on here so far, not just because of the torture, because we've probably seen stuff that's on par with that in some of these other films, but I think it's the psychological aspects of this one that bring it to a new level. The way the surgeon is obsessed with the relationship between the couple and the way he actually tricks them into thinking they'll be free, it's just so messed up. I'm curious what you guys think, because when we did the guinea pig movies, at least 1 and 2, it felt easier to say that they didn't really feel like real movies, but this one is shot well. I mean, it's got a production, even though it's low budget, and it's not pretending to be a snuff film or anything. Plus, there's something resembling a story here. I mean, what do you guys think? Is there art to be found here? All Night Long 2. Man, the first All Night Long movie had some messed up stuff, but All Night Long 2 takes it to a whole nother level of deviance. It doesn't seem to have any connection to the first film other than the main character is another nerdy guy wearing glasses, similar to one of the main characters in the first movie. The nerd in question is named Shunoichi, and the movie follows as he basically gets mixed up with a violent gang and all kinds of messed up stuff happens. I'll give you the gist of it, including some of the more disturbing stuff. Well, Shunoichi is walking down the street one day when he's approached by a man in white. In previous scenes, we actually see this dude in white killing small rodents and putting their guts in a pile. He smiles and offers Shunoichi protection, but it quickly cuts to the gang stripping him naked and beating him, but they eventually let him go. It seems like the guy in white has a thing for Shunoichi or something. It's really weird. He asks Shunoichi to hang out with him and they eat dinner together in an apartment, but when the man starts advancing on Shunoichi, he's not into it. So the guy pulls a knife knife on him and brings out a girl who's clearly mentally broken and possibly drugged as she tries to eat up some of the scraps of food like a dog. This is one of the most disturbing just because of how messed up the girl seems to be, and they show a close-up of her fingers where the gang ripped off her nails, which just makes me cringe. The man in white stabs her in the hand and pours milk all over her for some reason. So they stabbed her, drugged her, and pulled her fingernails off, but pouring milk on a lady? I mean, that's where I draw the line. He starts to manipulate Shunoichi now and gives him a whip to inflict pain on the girl while he watches from a security monitor. Well, the girl ends up blowing him and then puking on his face, so that's nice. The guy in white comes back and beats her almost to death, and they ditch her body in a garbage heap. After this incident, Shunoichi meets up with a hacker friend that he met online along with another guy. They all hang out that night, and one of them invites his girlfriend to come over as well. Well, they're all having fun when all of a sudden the gang shows up and things get very out of hand. The one hacker friend is forced to watch as they drug and abuse his girlfriend in front of him. The gang then puts her in the bathtub and starts washing her for whatever reason. What is up with this movie? Anyway, the gang leader then turns the water to scalding hot, and for whatever reason, Shunoichi, who's now becoming mentally deranged or something, just starts slow clapping. So yeah, he's totally lost it, or at least the gang leader's manipulation is paying off. They then give the hacker a knife and tell him to slash up his girlfriend or else get killed. In a big twist, the dude uses the knife to stab one of the gang members and then almost John Wick style kills all of them. It's really rad, and I have to say, a little bit of satisfying revenge. So now Shunoichi, who's just completely demented or whatever, pours gas on the gang leader's face and lights it on fire. I mean, the guy probably deserved it, but man, that's messed up. Meanwhile, the hacker and his girlfriend are banging in the next room, right next to the bed she was just assaulted on. Damn, dude, you couldn't go get help? How bad did you need to nut? You couldn't wait? Anyway, Shunoichi is now totally corrupted, slaughters the couple, and laughs. So that's all night long too. Definitely more messed up than the first one, and gets to the action way quicker as well. Lucky Sky Diamond. This is definitely up there in the what the hell did I just watch league of Japanese horror films. A couple things to mention right off. Lucky Sky Diamond's initials make up the acronym LSD, which makes sense because the whole film feels like it was conceived on a drug trip. Also, the characters appear like they're tripping through most of the film, which I'll touch on in a second. The movie's often mistaken for a guinea pig film. Well, it isn't a true entry in that series, but I can kind of see why because of the subject matter and the fact that it was on a few double feature VHS tapes with actual guinea pig movies. Anyway, let's just get into it. So the film starts with a woman screaming bloody murder as she essentially craps out her intestines onto the floor. I mean, what can you say? They know how to start a movie off right. It turns out this woman was dreaming as a doctor and a young woman come into the room and snap her out of it. This is where I'm missing a lot of info because the only real dialogue of the movie takes place here and I had no subtitles to help me. But basically things get weird really quick when the doctor begins making moves on the patient like a creep, while the girl we saw a moment ago is watching security cameras from a different room casually eating as she watches. Then we see the doctor and woman abusing the patient while talking to the camera, almost like a vlog or something. The weirdest part here is when the woman starts vigorously licking the poor lady's eye. They then cut all of her hair off and put her on an operating table with her mouth around a weird device. They cut open the back of her skull with a wire saw and begin prodding around, which makes the woman's body have random spasms. And from here, things get completely insane. Some light, easy listening jazz music starts playing and the doctor and nurse start dancing before she gives him head while he eats a cockroach. It's more comical than disturbing at this point because it's so bizarre. Next thing you know, they're just chilling while they put headphones with a loud noise over the victim's ears, and the nurse starts stabbing the poor lady repeatedly in the stomach with a scalpel. Later, the victim wakes up with a bandaged head and begins attempting to escape while clutching her stomach and runs into the lady torturer. They basically get into a scalpel fight and somehow the victim comes out on top, even though at this point she's not looking too hot. Her face is so pale it looks like a zombie from Night of the Living Dead or something. The next sequence is the absolute weirdest scene in the film and one of the weirdest things I've seen on the iceberg. The woman runs into a dude who has white and black makeup on his face and is wearing a cardboard box over his torso and cutting the cardboard box with a big ass knife. The victim is screaming bloody murder at the side of him as if it's Satan himself. Eventually she collapses into a pile of garbage and the cardboard man falls down next to her. Now the woman's intestines are poking out where she was stabbed repeatedly and the cardboard man begins stroking her guts and smiling while she screams in agony and terror. This, despite being somewhat comical, is definitely the most disturbing part to me. So she has enough of that and begins to smash his head with a hammer and stabs him with his own knife, to which he takes the knife out and stabs himself until his guts pour out as well. Now the woman crawls back to her hospital bed, and by the way, her brains are exploding exposed because the dude unraveled her bandage during the fight. She grabs what I believe are drugs of some kind, maybe LSD, and curls up under the bed. And that's the end. I mean, maybe it's an anti-drug campaign or something. I have no idea, but it is definitely up there with the most insane on the Berg for sure. I mean, wow. Visitor Q. Visitor Q starts off with a father having sex with his own prostitute daughter. Yeah, why don't we just skip this one? Nah, we gotta do it, even though it is easily one of the most disturbing movies on the list. It's from director Takashi Miike, who also directed Audition, which we covered in Tier 1, and a couple other movies along the way like GOZU. Okay, so I already mentioned the incest, and I wish that was the weirdest part of this movie, but let me try to give you the gist. Essentially, the film follows a messed up family, and you already know about the dad and daughter, plus a wife who is abused by her son and is also a prostitute and heroin addict. The son, when he's not abusing his mother, is being abused by some school bullies. So you got this dysfunctional family, and suddenly a man named Q shows up, and all kinds of weird, disturbing, unsettling things happen. Shortly after Q appears, things start changing for, I guess, the better. It really depends on how you look at this movie. Okay, so that's the basic overview. Now let me get into the good stuff. And I'm using the term good very loosely here, obviously. Spoilers ahead, but I just want to cover some of the most disturbing and strange scenes in the movie. Probably the most disturbing reoccurring theme here is breast milk, which you might remember coming up in GOZU. I feel like I might have a good guess as to what kind of kinks Takashi Miike's into. Anyway, at one point Q starts hitting on the mom, and essentially a sex scene plays out that features a lot of breast milk spraying everywhere. The son ends up walking in on this, by the way, which it's one thing to accidentally catch your mother in the act, but it's another when she's being milked like a goddamn cow. Apparently this puts a real pep in the step of the mom, and she regains some confidence, even fighting back against her son. Apart from that, there's a lot of general violence and sexual things in the movie. For instance, the dad at one point is shown being messed with by the same group of teens that bully his son, and they even decide to, well, they sodomize him. Don't feel too bad for him though, because later he ends up accidentally killing a lady, and that's on top of all the weird stuff that he has going on with his daughter. Another one of probably the most disturbing scenes in the film is when the dad starts to try and have his way with the dead body of the girl he killed, but because of rigor mortis, he gets stuck inside of her dead body. His wife helps him by sticking him in a bathtub with the corpse and giving him heroin, which I guess works because he pops right out. All right, I gotta stop there. That's enough of this movie. I can't handle it anymore. Well, there you have it. I hope you weren't eating while you watched this. Let me know if you like this type of video, and I'd definitely be down to make more mini compilations like this in the future. As I mentioned in the last video, I have a lot on my plate during the summer and just don't have as much time as usual to commit to making videos, which is why you might see a couple of shorter best of style videos these next couple of months. But don't worry, I'm still working really hard on several upcoming projects, including finishing up the horror villain Iceberg. So stay tuned, and thank you guys so much for all the support. And of course, special thanks to my patrons, Naomi Romero, Soma, Krusty the Crab, One Group, Laz Wishgender, Glimmering Haster, Hunter Piva, Heather M, Creepy Pasta Cube, A Slightly Bigger Ant, Ricky Shadow, Chase Middleton, Strong Kohi, Matt Rozak, Glenn Bridges, Steamboat Millie, The Beast Llama, Holy Ears, and Nat007. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you want a shout out like that at the end of every video, as well as bonus content, consider becoming a patron. The link is below. But I appreciate you guys watching at all, so thank you. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.